Joe.
Yes, Ronny Desmet became a Master of Mathematics with a dissertation on the mathematics and philosophy of quantum mechanics, and he obtained a PhD with a study on Whitehead's theory of relativity. At present, he teaches mathematics at Savarius College in Antwerp, Belgium. He edited the books Whitehead, The Algebra of Metaphysics, and Intuition in Mathematics and Physics, A Whiteheadian Approach. And his paper today is Whitehead's 1925 View of Function and Time.
Thank you, Joe. I'll try to show the presentation.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So, it's indeed kind of a historical paper, of course. It's about Whitehead's 1925 vision of function and time. And I will just focus on a few aspects of HL2. I think the aim of Whitehead's philosophy is thinking things together to obtain a synoptic rather than a one-eyed view. And the examples from HL2 I will be dealing with in this presentation is thinking together the morphological and functional view of reality, individuality and solidarity, physical and psychological time, and continuity and atomicity. As you will see, these four sets of contrasts, let's say, they are closely linked together. And with regard to the third one, Whitehead's attempt to think together physical and psychological time, we can mention that it's, according to Einstein, it was impossible to do just that. As he made clear both in 1921 in his discussions with Whitehead, and the same remark was given by Einstein to Bergson a year later in 1922, the impossibility to think physical and psychological time together. So let's first look at the morphological view of reality and time. This view sees reality as a procession of forms without any form of process. The Cartesian Newtonian view of physical reality views nature as a sheer succession of instantaneous configurations of bits of matter, each requiring nothing else than itself in order to exist. This is what Whitehead calls the fallacy of simple location. Another adversary, let's say, in this respect of Whitehead is Hume. Hume's view of perceptual reality is that the perception of nature is a sheer succession of instantaneous presentations of sense data, which, according to Whitehead, involves a reduction of perception to pure presentational immediacy. A very nice way of picturing the morphological view of reality is done by Bergson. It's his cinematographic view of reality. That's what Bergson calls it. And in HL1, for instance, Whitehead explicitly refers to that cinematographical view. It sees reality as a series of snapshots. So that means that there is no relatedness, no internal relatedness between those snapshots. A snapshot has no time depth. So time can at best be a continuity of instance. Now, opposed to that is the functional view of reality and time. In this view, reality is seen as a solidarity of processes of individuation. Notice that here in this phrase, individuality and solidarity are already joined. Whitehead is inspired, as we can see clearly from HL, by James and Bergson. He considers James to be a representative of modern psychology in philosophy, and he's especially impressed with James' essay, Does Consciousness Exist?, in which James holds that consciousness indeed is not a thinking substance, as Descartes would say, but a function of knowing. So the functional view is what really attracts Whitehead in that paper. Bergson he considers as the representative of modern physiology and biology in philosophy, and he is much impressed by Bergson's notion of duration, the notion of an organic whole of creative becoming. Whitehead himself says that one can arrive at a functional view of reality also when dealing with modern physics, which is his way to that notion of function and functionality. And of course, there is a lot to be said about the lectures in which he gives an overview of how he thinks modern physics finally arrived at the functional view of reality. But I just limit myself here to saying that according to Whitehead, the old quantum physics already shows that a quantum of action is an activity through time and not at an instant. And of course, the quantum of action is an atomic quantity. So here as well, an activity through time, not at an instant, means that it's all about functioning, about activity. Now, a function involves input, functioning, and output. And there is, of course, much in HL2 about a process in the functional sense of the input by prehension, the function of concretions, and if you want to call it like that, the output of supersession. Prehension, of course, is a kind of retention of the past. For concretions, as the main function, is a concretions of perceptual and conceptual functionings into a whole, involving a whole realm of potential modes of relational functioning. And one of the aspects in HL2 that I really found enlightening is the fact that indeed eternal objects are considered in many pages of HL2 as potential modes of relational functioning, which is really a marvelous way of introducing eternal objects without immediately seeing them as in a real separate realm, separate from the realm of actuality. Supersession involves, let's say, in Husserlian terms, a protension to the future. It is a creative passage to the future. And it is a term, I've looked it up, which is not at all used in HL1. It's not used in, it's not in the index in any way, nor of HL1, nor of process and reality. It seems to be a term that is specific for the lectures that we're now studying. If you look at the functional view of reality and time, it's all about then internal relatedness, the prehension and the supersession, as the speaker of yesterday, Christian Frigerio, highlighted. They all point at the internal relatedness. And of course, in functioning and processing and activity, there is time depth. Time, in fact, is seen as an atomic creativity, as an epochal becoming. Now, Whitehead, he agrees with James and Bergson. The functional point of view rises out of science, modern biology, modern physics and psychology. And so time depth enters into each actual entity, because an ultimate entity cannot be described by shape, not morphological. It has to be something which embraces all time in some sense. You have to have an activity, an achieving, a whole function. He even said, according to HL1, to functioning through time is the thing itself. But Whitehead's view is a synoptic view. It's not a one-sided view. So reality is not only functional. Well, yes, it is functional in the concrete, but also morphological in the abstract. And time is atomic creativity in the concrete, but also a continuity of instance in the abstract. Some quotes: life is a doing, not a being at successive instants. And you cannot express a world whose most concrete aspect is the function of concretions in terms of morphology. But nonetheless, morphological abstractions are factors in something more concrete. The physicist's space and time are obviously abstractions from the concrete world, but they express certain systematic relations between the parts of the world. And this is what Whitehead's method of extensive abstraction is ultimately all about. It's to abstract space-time from concrete part-whole relations. And that is the reason why he can, for instance, think together the psychological time and the physical time, because he starts from concrete, perceived part-whole relationships and abstracts space-time. Well, Whitehead is not completely in accord with Bergson. Bergson's conceives his the morphological, cinematographic view of reality and time as an error of the intellect. But for Whitehead, the morphological view, as just said, is an abstraction from concrete reality. The error is the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. It's attributing to your abstractions a greater concreteness than they really have. And that's quite different than saying that there is this kind of cinematographic necessity of the intellect, which is an error. So there is a warning here for physicist philosophers. A definite creative act is looked on as handing over to physics the ultimate unit, that is the quantum of action. But the latter is an abstraction. So he is a physicist, and a mathematical physicist, but he is clear that philosophy should be more imaginative than science and include practice. That is the ocean of immediate experience which lies outside the petty canals, which are the various sciences. Let me give an example from HL2 of including practice into philosophy. Well, philosophy has for its workshop, HL2 says, the immediate concrete experience. And there is also in the time paper, there is this argument that we do speak of the future. We have a calendar of next year. We use a railway table. These are all immediate concrete experiences. And Whitehead refers to Arabian Nights, in which Shahryar postpones the execution of his wife so that he can hear the rest of her story. Well, this shows us that philosophy is also the wonder of the obvious, because the future here, even though not yet actual, is not nothing, but it is something that is definite. You see, for instance, take the Arabian Nights example. The man's longing for a future event is part of his present essence. A present occasion is internally related to future occasions. I've added that sentence for Christian Frigerio. So the internal relatedness is not only a relatedness of the present to the past, but there is also this internal relatedness to the future. And HL2 expresses the definiteness of the future in each actual occasion, the creative passage of each actual occasion into the future with the notion of supersession. That's exactly why this term has been introduced. Now, another interesting aspect is that Whitehead says somewhere that the concept of nature has no epochal view, but is clear on supersession. So indeed, we can find in concept of nature, we can find a lot of marvelous quotes on the, let's say, the retention of the past and the anticipation of the future. But he explicitly says in HL2 that concept of nature has no epochal view, which reconfirms that the atomicity of becoming and the associated epochal theory of time indicate a change in Whitehead's thought in the course of his Harvard lectures. Now, it is true, as Paul Bogart said yesterday, that there is a constant preoccupation with thinking together, continuity and atomicity all over Whitehead's publications and all over his career. That is definitely the case. But, you know, in a concept of nature, there is a continuity of becoming. There is no atomic structure of durations. And so in CN and even in HL1 prior to March 1925, he speaks about atomic character as imposed upon continuous becoming. Even in his theory of primates, which is his way of viewing at the old quantum theory or the findings of the old quantum theory, he looks at the evident atomic character that is displayed by experiment as imposed upon continuous becoming. But in HL after April 1925, he speaks about the atomicity of becoming and the associated atomic temporality. Now, one might say that there is a change of mind in the March-April 1925 period. But, you know, as always, Whitehead tries to think together continuity and atomicity. And he says, even though, which is clear now in HL2, even though there is no continuity of becoming, there is a becoming of continuity. You must know that he did not immediately see how to rethink everything in terms of the atomicity of becoming. And I'll say something, I think a strong argument is, it has often been said, well, if Whitehead thought differently, why didn't he say so? He said, for instance, that the critique given to him on his method of extensive abstraction by Theodore de Laguna, he mentioned...
Got about 2 minutes.
Yes, he mentioned the critique of Theodore Laguna and how he took that into account. Well, there is more change if you compare his method of extensive abstraction in CN and his method of extensive abstraction in Process and Reality. In the former case, these relations are relations between events. In Process and Reality, it's relations between regions. That's a complete difference. He can no longer think in terms of events, because you cannot keep on dividing events if there is an atomicity of becoming. You need to go to regions, which is a whole lot more abstract already, and which is something, a region is something that has become, like continuity becomes, well, regions become, there is a becoming of regions, you see, and good. Well, we can discuss on that further on. I want to give two more details. There is a note on the role of beauty in science, which I like a lot. You know that Whitehead has this alternative theory of gravitation to Einstein's general theory of relativity, and yes.
Your slide is not fully transitioned. I think your animation is messing with it. Can you try? There we go. Now it's coming through. Thanks.
Well, I don't know. Can you see the note on the role of beauty in science?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, now it looks good.
Thanks. So one of the things that I studied is why did physicists, contemporary physicists of Whitehead, prefer Einstein's theory to Whitehead's? And one of the reasons is that they thought that, in the 1920s at least, they thought that Einstein's theory was more beautiful. And it's interesting to see how that aspect is also given in HL2. That he says that physicists really ask what is the most beautiful law that might apply here. And not only in comparing theories, also in producing theories, so in the discovery and the development of theories. He says science has been chiefly deduced not for utility but for aesthetic reasons. As a matter of fact, a common idea that merely following the facts leads you to the law is all wrong. The scientist really sees a pretty key to the universe and fits it into the facts. But he also says behind all our thought stands nature accepting or rejecting the creativity of her children. So he still has a hope at that moment in time, for instance, that his theory might be justified by a refined experiment. A last note is on Whitehead and Heisenberg. You know, even though Whitehead has this own view on the old quantum theory, it is in fact about the old quantum theory. It's not about the new quantum theory which emerged after 1925. But based on some of the things that are part of the old quantum theory, like the notion that action is energy multiplied by time and that there is a minimum quantum of action, Whitehead says, as you concentrate in time, you gain energy. Concentration of time increases energy. Well, if you read that and you don't know who wrote it, you might think that this is all about Heisenberg's 1927 uncertainty principle with respect to energy and time. Now, we know that Hartshorne gave Heisenberg's famous 1927 article to Whitehead. So did Whitehead study it? Did he like it? Maybe HL3 will throw some light on that. My guess is that Whitehead welcomed the fact that the new quantum mechanics closed the door to the fallacy of simple location and opened the door to a functional interpretation of nature. I don't know whether I have the time. I have this small example of the value, the really tremendous value of HL for Whitehead's scholarship.
Yes and no. We're ahead of schedule and over time at the same time.
Okay.
So can you maybe just very quick?
No, then I'll stop here. I don't want to take anyone else's time. Okay.
Well, no, I think we'll have time for discussion and let's see what folks. If you hit stop sharing, will your camera come back on, Ronny?
Voila.
Voila. Very good. Excellent. Okay, so let's invite in folks to join this great discussion. We've lost, unfortunately, some of the colleagues that we were hoping to be able to engage with. Paul Bogart sends his apologies for having to step away. He was hoping to engage with you, but lots of good stuff to talk about here. Anybody want to start us off engaging Ronny? Matt's got something in the couple of things in the chat. Matt, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was eager to hear what Ronny was about to share, but we can follow up on that later. But well, what I was sharing in the chat about what you had to share on your slide about beauty, Ronny, it made me realize I don't think Whitehead ever cites Kant's third critique, or I haven't heard him mention it, but when Whitehead says that the common idea that merely following the facts leads you to the law, that's all wrong. The scientist sees a pretty key to the universe and fits it into the facts. It reminded me of just what Kant has to say in his critique of judgment about the importance of aesthetics. Though in that critique, Whitehead denies genius to the scientist and only affords it to the artist, because he doesn't think the scientist can understand how they would intuitively perceive nature's operation, whereas the artist can, but then can't explain to you how they did it either. But that was just my reflection. Really appreciate your paper, so thank you.
Okay, any response to that, Ronny, or should I move on? Yeah, okay.
Not specifically, no.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Clinton, please.
Yes, thank you for that very interesting paper. I really liked hearing about the transition in Whitehead's thought. You mentioned events in concept of nature, and I've always liked that term and thought it just a more generic term, more general than actual occasions, to maybe include actual occasions and nexus. And it was interesting to see how Whitehead in HL2 makes that shift from events that I guess they were not really quite like an actual occasion. So would you want to say more about how events become actual occasions as we move from concept of nature through HL2 and through, if you like, process reality?
Yes, well, I conceive an actual occasion as an elementary event, and the society of actual occasions can form a larger event. But the point is especially that actual occasions are like quanta of activity, whereas an event is a continuous happening. And so events can be, at least in concept of nature, events can be infinitely divided. They lose some character. There is always that aspect of wholeness, of course, just as in Bergson, in concept of nature, they lose the character of wholeness. He already makes the example of music. In concept of nature, you need a whole musical phrase, and not you. If you start cutting it up, the musical phrase gets lost. But it's possible to, in fact, infinitely divide events. Whereas if you consider an event as a society of actual occasions, you have ultimately disatomicity.
Thank you, that helps.
George.
Here we go. Yeah, I wanted to go back. Thank you so much, Ronny, for this. This is amazing work. Not surprisingly, along with your other contributions. This one really raises some interesting issues. But let's start with this Kant business. Matt asks, or Ben asks, and Matt answers that you don't see any evidence, and I agree, I don't see any evidence that Whitehead really looked beyond the first critique, that he knew anything about or cared anything about Kant's theory of morality. A shame he didn't look at his aesthetics in the critique of judgment, because they would have, I think, at least found some foils, if not some supporting ideas. This, the one you raised, being a principal one, that we talk about not just about the accuracy of theories, but of the beauty of theories. In mathematics, the elegance of theories. And elegance, I remember specifically in mathematical proofs, was a criterion by which you would judge the adequacy of the proof. There might be 3 or 4 different patterns to prove a theorem or to set out a conception of gravity or something. But the most elegant, obvious, which meant several things. It meant sort of clarity of exposition, often conciseness, as opposed to a lot of, epicycles. Gosh, what else would go into a judgment like that you hear mathematicians and physicists make all the time? But it certainly is an aesthetic criterion, although I don't think they mean it as a substitution for validity. They mean it as a preference in validity for the concise or the perfectly phrased proof. See, where was I going with this? Kant, critique of judgment and elegance in mathematics, and a preference for Einstein. That's the other piece. It is hard for me to see how that elegance or beauty would apply directly to Einstein with non-linear differential equations and all the clumsiness as well as the anti-intuitive features in the mathematics of the general theory, as opposed to something that Whitehead himself was working towards, which struck me as greater clarity, simplicity, and elegance, as well as a preservation of common sense and experience. And so that's where I'll leave the question for you to reflect on. Where is the beauty in Einstein vis-a-vis Whitehead?
Well, the remarkable thing is that when Einstein's theory was first published and learned about in Great Britain, a lot of those people thought it was a terribly ugly theory. They were unfamiliar with tensors. Some called them scorpions. So they were really not so pleased with Einstein's theory. But thanks to, for instance, Archer Eddington, there were then a number of elegant metaphors about the curvature of space, which were helping out. Even though it was popular science, they helped out a lot of professional mathematicians. And by the time, there is a time lag. When Whitehead published his theory of relativity, this was 1922, 6 years after the original publication of Einstein's, there had been a kind of conversion by the British physicists to Einstein's theory. And then a theory which normally, if it had popped up in 1916, it would probably have convinced them to go for that theory, because it was so like Maxwell's theory, which they knew, which they studied at Cambridge. So if Whitehead's theory had been, like, say, simultaneous with Einstein's, they would not have bothered to go through the pain of learning all these new mathematical methods. And so let's say that the aesthetic canon of physicists changed during those years, not to the benefit of Whitehead's theory. I've compared that in an article with the fact that, like, even female beauty that can, there are notions of female beauty that can change in a pretty tight period of time. There was like Marilyn Monroe, who was let's say, considered as a prototype of female beauty, and then we see in a short period of time this changes to Twiggy, which is a completely different figure. And when you then are a Marilyn Monroe lookalike, when Twiggy is popular, that won't do, you see? And that is what I compared Whitehead's theory with. It was like a Maxwell lookalike theory at a moment when people wanted this Einstein looking theory. So
does that make Whitehead Marilyn Monroe in this case, or?
Yeah, yes, that's it.
Okay.
This theory is compared.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I would love to maybe pull in Dan for one more question. This is an enjoyable line of discussion. Thank you for that. Dan, do you want to jump in? I think you're muted though.
Okay. For all it's worth, Hartshorne did read all three critiques of Kant, and he offered what might be a process criticism of Kant that would have been acceptable to Whitehead, and it is that the third critique should have been the first critique. And Kant would have looked quite different if the concerns, in the third critique were primary. And also within the first critique, the transcendental aesthetic should have been given greater attention rather than running through that to get to the transcendental deductions. The transcendental aesthetic has a lot of things that are perhaps compatible with process thought. So Hartshorne gave what might have been Whitehead's view of Kant if Whitehead had read all three critiques. So maybe he did, I don't know. So thanks.
Thanks, Dan.